Business Matters. The title suggests many things. The important issue is the world revolves around business, society, organizations, individuals, and even religion survives and thrives because of business. Business has to encompass not just financial commodity and service transactions. It has also to include welfare, justice, empowerment, environmental, and other issues too. Every week, Business Matters will delve into aspects of business that impact our lives. We will seek out extraordinary and ordinary people who have done extraordinary things. Facilitators, educators, and entrepreneurs will be invited to inspire and enlighten our listeners. Join Anwar Mullah for an interactive show and find out what really matters in business.
نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. 8:39 on a Tuesday evening. Yes, it's the Minara Chamber of Commerce that brings you the Business Matters program. You with me, Anwar Mullah, and I'm going to be with you till 9:30. And as is normal on a Tuesday evening, with me, my co-host in the studio, Imran Mullah. Imran, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, and lovely to be at the studio this Tuesday evening.
Absolutely, and a very, very knowledgeable guest lined up for tonight, a person I've known for, I think, over 20 years now, although he doesn't look that old. And he is none other than Ibrahim Patel. I've known Ibrahim for a long time. Ibrahim is no stranger to Radio Al Ansar. He's been on the program many times as in his capacity with the Minara Chamber of Commerce. Ibrahim was at one time the chairman of the Minara Chamber of Commerce, and is still very much involved with the Durban and the Minara Chamber of Commerce, and in fact he's a director. He's also a director of a company called Siakhoza, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Technologies. He's the Honorary Consul General for Indonesia, and he's also the chair for Youth Fellowship Program at the World Islamic Economic Forum. So, I mean, he wears many hats and gives you an idea of how actively Ibrahim is involved in the community in Durban and in South Africa in general. So, Ibrahim, without much further ado, it's Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to Radio Al Ansar.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Anwar. And salams to Imran. I'm feeling a bit uneasy because normally I used to be at the interview mic interviewing you, and today I'm on the other side.
Absolutely. Well, Ibrahim, tonight we're going to be talking around a very interesting topic, and that's startups. So let's just get into the gist of the program by saying, want to introduce us into what is a startup?
Well, Anwar, there's been various definitions of startups. If I take it at the basic level, where we as a community have been in business for many years, and the startup would effectively be someone who's just starting up their business, whether it is a small business or they've just opened a little store, or they've opened a little business at home, and we would call that a startup. But in a mature world and in a globalized world, startups have taken up a different meaning altogether. They've now taken on what we would go beyond what is called the SME, and these are basically businesses that are starting to grow. They have been set up as businesses that would have a huge impact, and it's given rise to what is now called impactful entrepreneurship, rather than just entrepreneurship. And impactful entrepreneurship talks about how this startup, as it grows, makes a wider impact, not just on its owner or its community, but across the entire world. So if I take, for example, in terms of an impactful startup, one would say Uber is an impactful startup. It was a small company, started up, bootstrapped itself, and now its impact is felt across the globe. So there's a wide spectrum of what is known as startups, whether the startup is a small business that you are starting off at home or in a small little store, or whether it is going to be a business that will grow and create an impact across the globe.
Wow, what a brilliant example to use there, Ibrahim. Uber, something that has had an impact on all our lives, I think, and throughout the globe. You're quite right. I never thought of it that way. So Ibrahim, when we want to delve a little bit into startups here in our small little way community of Durban, and we want to see basically, we're going to talk about how startups can be financed or how they can get financing, and looking at it from both perspectives, from a financier perspective as well as from a perspective of a person who's wanting to start up a little business. So let's start with the person that's now wanting to start up, and he obviously needs some finance to get going because there would be some capital costs involved. Where does a person like this really, excuse the pun, start up?
Well, I think we need to make a distinction between an investment in a business and financing the business. And that would be the first departure point, because financing a business is different from investing in the start of the business. And as you rightly pointed out, the investment would be the capital that is put into the business to start the business off, to buy the equipment, or to buy the raw materials, or to find the premises. And as that business grows, it would need to be financed, and it would find different modes of financing it. If I look back, into particularly in the community of Durban, as you put it, when I was a little kid and someone wanted to start up a business, there were three avenues of funding that they could look at. One was family funding, that the family might have some money that they would put together and start this business off, which is where a lot of our businesses have grown from, and we see successful businesses that have grown out of it.
Absolutely.
The second one was you approach the bank and you ask the bank for some financing to fund your business. And banks at that time looked at your business and said, what is your cash flow? What's your repayment? And so the investment or the funding that the bank gave you depended on how good your business plan was. So if your business plan was fancy and it showed a good cash flow, all that the bank manager was interested in was whether your business could pay back the loan. And the challenge with that was, for a startup, is that they required a security of an asset. So if you had a 1 million rand asset and you needed a 1 million rand finance, why would you go to the bank in the first instance? And if you were a startup, you wouldn't have the 1 million rand asset
Absolutely,
to start off your business with in the first instance. So banks were very conventional, very conservative in this, and all that they looked at was what was your cash flow and your ability to repay their loan. And the third, of course, the source of funding was people's savings. I might have had some saving. I was a teacher, and I had a nice retirement plan, and that retirement plan came together. Or I had, and pardon this, I'm going to use this as a pun onward because of our long friendship, or I had an Oasis fund that I could access. And, it gave me this phenomenal return over the last 20 years. And I could now use that funding to start off my business. So we had these three traditional modes of funding. And that's where the community came out of, particularly out of its own resources rather than bank financing. And bank financing, of course, had the issue of whether it was a ribawi transaction, whether there was interest factors involved in it. All of that confined us in getting that bank loan. But we grew our businesses with a great deal of dedication and foresight into those businesses. And so today, when you look around the community of Durban, you see these massive businesses that have come about. And they've all come from people putting little bits of money together, that close community bond that we've had, and those businesses have grown out of it. Of course, those families have seen superb returns, but also those who have invested into those businesses have also seen great returns out of it. So the concept of investor funding is not foreign. It's not new to the community of Durban. When I say our community, I don't particularly mean a small microcosmic community, but rather the community of Durban is well known to this concept of funding from close family, relatives, friends who pool money together to start businesses off.
That's quite an intuitive or very insightful answer to the three types of funding available. Basically grouped it very nicely. And if we look forward over the past, call it 10 to 15 years, a lot of startups have moved away from the traditional model. So what are the new methods of funding that have become available to startups?
Well, Imran, Imran, of course, the newer model of funding. When I spoke about the traditional models, as I said, when we were kids, these were what were out there. Today, the startup sector has evolved into a very sophisticated sector, and so startups are no longer seen as someone who couldn't do well as a doctor is now started up a little business, or he couldn't make it at school, so he started off a business. Today, the startup is seen as a profession. It's seen as a very attractive form of business. And so there's a lot of money that is now available to it. Pardon the pun, but if I start at how the startup industry has evolved and the sources of funding that has evolved, it comes from maybe in the late 1990s when people started talking about SMEs and how to fund SMEs. And so you saw things like the Small Business Development Corporation, the SBDC, which has now become Business Partners, government funding that came about, but also there was this emergence of the private money, the private investment that was taking place. So you had angel investors, people that said, look, we'll assist you with starting off your business, and they provided some funding. But at the back of it, they also provided their expertise. And so you had angel funding that was available. Then came along the venture capital, people that had big sums of money that wanted to invest into startups that had huge potential for growth. So if we go back to our Uber example, Uber sold parts of its growth trajectory as it grew in its maturity to venture capitalists who made huge amounts of money when Uber had its initial placement offering, its IPO, and then its listing on the stock exchange. And so they made lots of money out of it. So venture capital is a very good source of funding. Today in South Africa, we now also have a great deal of government grants and government funding that is available. So there's a lot more funding that is available to startups. And if we take examples of government funding, for instance, there's as I pointed out earlier on, there's Business Partners, there's IDC, there's the Black Industrialist Development Program, there's the National Youth Development Agency, the NYDA, which provides funding to startups and established businesses that are run by young entrepreneurs or people of young ages, between the ages of 18 and 35. And the funding that you can get from them is up to a maximum of about 200,000 rands, if I'm not mistaken. Then you have also things like the Black Industrialist Scheme, which is a grant that is provided by government, particularly to black industrialists. And the award funding is up to a maximum of 50 million rands, depending on how the business is managed and who manages it and how it supports other businesses and the greater impact it will have to society. Then, of course, those that are into technology will find that there's the Technology Innovation Development Agency, Technology Innovator Agency, the TIA, which has a number of grants that are available, up to about 1 million rands. And these are awarded to startup tech companies particularly. Earlier on I spoke about the Business Partners, but you also have, as part of IDC and government, you have the Small Enterprise Finance Agency, which is SEFA, which grants up to funding to invest in small businesses. And they've got about 1.4 billion rands of funding that they invest into these small businesses. So there's a lot of these funding that is available. There are a lot of agencies that are providing this grant funding. So as you point out, Imran, that the start-up funding scene has evolved quite substantially and it's now gone on to a slightly more mature stage, which is the 14J venture capital. And Anwar, you would be an expert in this here. But unfortunately, the 14J comes to an end at the end of June. And that was a scheme of people investing their monies to get tax rebates, but investing these into startups or into tech companies where they would see their returns as well. So there's a great deal more funding avenues and mechanisms that are available to startups today.
Fantastic. Slight correction. That would be the Section 12J, which unfortunately, as you rightfully pointed out, comes to an end at the end of June. because government has found through their own research that there was not enough job creation through the venture capital method of investing into small businesses. But you pointed out and you mentioned large quantums of funds flowing through from be it private equity or government funding that's now flowing through into the startup space. And a word that's synonymous with startups at the moment is incubator programs. Do you perhaps want to explain that a bit more?
Well, there have been a number of incubators and growth accelerators as well that have been, or hubs that have been created, both in the private sector and by government. And these allow startups. So, for instance, if I wanted to set up a factory making aluminium window frames, for instance, I would need premises. I would need the acumen on how to find my customers. I would need a little bit of someone to hold my hand and take me through the process. Some of these incubators are as basic as that, as providing premises. And Itala, if you look at the Itala hubs, they've been fantastic at that. They're providing premises at a very subsidized cost. They're providing the equipment that's in their premises as well. And they guide you through the entire process of setting up and launching your business, holding your hand through the process. And as your business starts growing and starts maturing, they then leave your hand as you become, in terms of a child now becoming an adult, and letting the child go. So there have been a number of incubators. Within Durban, we have a few of them as well. The Itala premises, we have the eThekwini incubators, we have the hubs, we have Smart Exchange, which is particularly around tech startups and incubating tech startups. We even have now recently, today I think it is, the Regent Business School has launched their Red Hub, which would assist startup businesses and SMEs in different forms in how to access funding, how to, and they effectively hold their hand through the process. So the incubators have played a very crucial role in helping a number of businesses within the startup space.
Ibrahim, a lot of those organizations that you've mentioned, and there are quite a few, are in the formal sector. And yes, one can approach them for funding, and they are there, and government has played its part as well in terms of making funds available. But one of the gripes that we hear quite often is that, unfortunately, I'm not black enough to qualify for that spending, for that grant. When approached, I need to have a BBE partner who's black rather than Indian or colored, and I've disqualified for a lot of these grants due to that. However, we as a community, and we know there's some very, very rich individuals, families, who have large sums of money, and they also are looking for opportunity to invest these monies into startups or into something where they can make a decent profit. And it's a fact and that what you can make in your own business, nobody else can make for you by investing into, you spoke about earlier, unit trust or whatever. Yes, you can make a decent return out of that, but what you can make in business by putting in your hard sweat, you can make much more. You can turn your money much quicker. And look, you can lose money as well, but you can make money a lot quicker, and you can grow your business a lot quicker. So perhaps a thought and something that we can explore, because we're going to have to break for the 9 o'clock news now, but maybe something that we can explore after that is perhaps through the Minara Chamber or some other body similar to that, we can create a forum whereby we can link an investor with a person with a potential startup, and because a person who's now, and I get these calls quite often, who wants to start up a business. He's a carpenter, or as you said, he's a guy who wants to open an aluminium window factory, but he doesn't know where to reach out for these fundings. By the same token, there are people that want to invest, but they don't know who are those people that are looking for these investments. So could we perhaps use the Minara Chamber as a platform to put the link the two people, and then if they click, they click. If they don't, unfortunately, they don't. But maybe a thought process that we can explore after the news of getting these people together and seeing if we can do something for the investor and for the person that's looking for investment. Another thought that is basically going through my mind is there would be startups at various levels. And again, you spoke a little bit about that. There's the very small ones. They may need only 20,000 Rand to get started. Yet you would get somebody that says, well, I need some big machinery and I need 5 million Rand to get started. So it will be different horses for courses, if you want to put it that, and there would be different people that would be able to invest in these type of businesses. So all in all, I mean, what you spoke about is fantastic, but I'm saying maybe we need to bring it down to a little bit onto our local level, whereby we can say, without looking and going for the formal funding, within the community, we could be able to assist these people to get going. Your quick thought on that, and then we'll break for the news.
I know that is such a wonderful suggestion and something that we're very passionate about, and I was going to get to that later in the discussion. But before you go on to your news break, I'll leave you with a small example. About 10 years ago, there was a young gentleman came to me and he said he wants to start off a business. And you wouldn't believe that what he required was 500 Rand to start off his business. And his business was going to be buying peanuts in bulk, putting it into small packets and going down to the taxi rank and selling these packets of peanuts. He would buy the bulk peanuts in 100 Rands for the packet, and then make them up into smaller packets and sell them at a Rand and make 200 Rands out of the big packet. And all he required was 500 Rands of funding. And of course, no bank is going to fund him for 500 Rands.
Right.
And I was not going to give him a donation of 500 Rands. I said to him, I'll be an investor in your business. And, we'll work on this business together. From the 500 Rand investment, he's now got, or the last discussion that we had with him, was he was buying about 5,000 Rands per week, from 500 Rands a month to 5,000 Rands per week. He's grown his business from selling peanuts to adding in donuts to adding in other things, and he's grown his business quite substantially that he's able to support his family.
Fantastic. Ibrahim, that's exactly what we want to hear. The number in the studio, 0861904904, or if you choose to WhatsApp us, it's 060-904-1056. Ibrahim, so we said let's see how we can explore and how can we, as individuals who are connected, help from an investor perspective as well as a person who is looking for that finance. So have you given it a bit of thought, and what can we come up with?
No, as you asked that question before the news break, you got my mind racing into how we can make people meet. And, there was a very nice saying that I had learned. I'd gone for Hajj the first time. And the late Mufti Yasir told us this say, he said, the Prophet said, when you come for Hajj, it's salam, kalam, ta'al, which means greet, meet, and do business. This is inculcated in our religion, the concept of us getting together for mutual benefit, for helping one another. Now, there will be two questions that one can ask. One is, how does a startup business access this funding, this investor funding? And the second question would be, is that what is in it for me to invest into the startup business? So let me start by answering the second question first.
Okay.
And that question is the more important question as to why would we want to encourage people to invest into these startups. And I can think of a number of reasons, but the two main reasons that have come to my mind is that if I had some money, I want to also make some kind of return on my money. I want to grow my money. And today it's very difficult. As our expenses keep piling up, we're looking for other resources of growing our money. And what better way than me investing into a business that has a potential of growth and would give me some kind of return, rather than me keeping my money in a financial institute and having a set amount of money that's coming through to me every month or every year. Here I have the opportunity of sharing not in the revenue of the business, but also in the potential. If that business gets sold at some point, there would be a capital appreciation and I would get some lump sum that's come out of it. And the second important aspect of why I should be investing into these businesses is that it creates jobs. It changes the community. It helps uplift the community. And if we think about this in a wide sense, a number of our institutions that assist the community, whether it is the zakah institutions, whether it is the NGOs, the madrasas, the masjids, are all dependent on business funding because these businesses fund them with their functionality. And the growth of Muslim businesses in South Africa is largely what runs the Zakat organization, will in turn impact on the community. So the services that these organizations offer is dependent on the success of the businesses behind them. And so in our investing, not only am I going to be looking at the return that I was getting, but what impact would I have on the greater community? And that is something that we need to keep in mind as well, so that we pool the resources that we have. You might have 5 rands that is sitting quietly somewhere. I might have 5 rands that is sitting quietly somewhere. And we put those 5 rands together. And all of a sudden, we are able to fund another Uber, for instance. That is on the one hand. The first question coming back to is that as a business, I need to find these sources of funding. And why would I approach an investor for funding or the community for funding? In approaching the community for funding, I also need to keep in my mind as the business that I have a duty not just to my business, but then to my investors as well, that I make certain that the money that I am putting together and putting into my business, I'm going to make certain that I will endeavor to the best of my ability to make my business grow, because I know I am responsible to all these investors and I have this weight on my shoulder. It is a very good source of funding for my business. I don't have to approach any bank. I don't have to put up any equity, not equity, but I don't have to put up any assets. I don't have to put up any security. Yet I have these equity partners that are coming. I may have to give off a percentage of my business and say, Anwar, you are investing 5,000 rand into my business, and I will give you 1% of my business for investing the 5,000 rand. And so, we then becoming partners in this business. And it comes back to this whole concept of the Ummah being supporters of each other. And if I take this back into the Minara, we talk about mutual benefit, that how do we grow each other through collaboration and sharing of resources. And this is the fundamental essence of what Minara was created for, is that can we share not just in the monetary side, but also in the intellectual capitalism that we have, because we have a great deal of knowledge within our community. And as much as I know we talk about how do we access this funding, but also we must at the same time talk about how we can access the expertise and the repository of knowledge that we have within our community. So all these successful businesses that have come about will also want to grow their businesses. And I'm going to throw a little curveball in this conversation.
I was waiting for that, Ibrahim. I was waiting for it.
We have these big businesses that are around, that are growing in a vertical stream. Why are they not diversifying? Why are they not expanding their businesses and they themselves investing into startups that would support their own businesses? And without being too controversial, if the classical example that comes to mind is the Bidvest Group, and how they have put their tentacles into every sector, and each one of those businesses supporting each other with one holding company that is invested into all these smaller businesses, and those smaller businesses are now growing, supporting each other, doing business with each other, growing internal revenue, and therefore providing a fantastic capital appreciation to this holding company. Imagine if we did that within our community, how we could support each other. If I wanted photocopying paper, I only buy it from Anwar. And Anwar, in turn, when he wants to buy pot plants, he only buys it from this business. And so we carry on supporting each other in that way. And so, we create this huge, would I say, community conglomerate. And these are the kind of things we need to start talking about, that how do we then put our trust into each other? And there, I think, is where our slight challenge is. Anwar, can you trust me with your money?
Okay.
The Bidvest Group is a fantastic example, and most of our Muslim businesses that we speak about that are quite wealthy are second or third generation businesses, and hopefully in the coming years, in the next 5 to 10 years, which would be the next generation, they start playing in the listed space like the Bidvest Group and vertically integrate, as you mentioned, to grow and see the real potential that they have and become big players, major players in the world economy, inshallah.
But Bidvest didn't start off as a listed company.
They didn't. You're correct. They didn't.
and that's the point I'm making, is that it started off by accumulating these smaller businesses and then growing this large business, which ultimately listed on the stock exchange.
Yes, and Ibrahim, I'm also thinking as you speak and saying, well, it can go a lot further than just providing the financing. What about the expertise? Because there's a lot of companies that have already paid the school fees. There's people sitting at management level that have paid the school fees already. They've learned by their mistakes. And you don't want a startup to be repeating those mistakes. So they can be guided. They can guide these startups as well and lend the expertise, maybe for a small percentage stake in the company, if it comes to that, but it would lead the startup in the right direction.
Absolutely, and if we think about, we spoke about the listed companies, and listed companies retain their talents by giving their talent shares in the company as well. So we've seen a number of CEOs of listed companies who have been given phenomenal parts of the company as shares to retain their talent and make sure they don't go after a competitor. And these are the things we need to start thinking about as we mature. And as Imran pointed out, we intergeneration businesses and we're maturing, but we also need to start seeing a global picture. How do we then take how would I put it? How would we take advantage of the opportunities that are around us all the time? We've come into a time when business has become so globalized. There's such a huge plethora of competitors, and the barriers of entry into business are so much smaller nowadays that, Anwar, if you talk about, say, 20 years ago, if I wanted to open up a shop, I had to go and look for a space somewhere. I had to find the bricks and mortar. I had to pay 3 months rental deposit. I had to outfit this place. And I probably was down 200,000 rands before I started the first day. Today, all I need is a Gmail account and an Instagram page, and off I am, and I don't even need any of that investment. So we've democratized business to such an extent that the barriers of entry are so minimal. But those businesses are also startups, and those businesses are showing phenomenal growth. And particularly now at this time, as we face this pandemic, which has changed the way the world is doing business, more and more people are drifting towards the online and the e-commerce space. And are we then pooling our resources together to become huge players in the e-commerce space? If we look at a company like Naspers, a substantial portion of its revenue is now coming from its online platforms like Takealot and Mr. D. Amazon made a phenomenal amount of money last year purely because its e-commerce platform has started flying. How are we playing in that space, and how can we get together the minds that have the ability to create the e-commerce space with the people that have the capital?
I'm glad you mentioned the likes of Amazon and Takealot, Mr. D, because when I think of all these companies and the earlier example of Uber, the word that comes to mind to describe these impactful entrepreneurs is disruptors. So in which industry are these disruptors playing in at the moment? So e-commerce is one of them, but are there any other examples?
At this point in time, I think that every industry is subject to disruption. So whether it is the retail space is subject to disruption, whether it is the medical space that is also subject to disruption because, if we at one stage you had to go to the doctor. Today the doctor doesn't even have to come to you. You can just put up a little screen at home. You have this camera. You can put up a little monitor onto your finger, and the doctor can examine you via remote control. Every industry is now getting disrupted. The agricultural industry is being disrupted. We have, if I give an example, we now have agricultural farms that are being monitored by robots, by drones, by driverless tractors who are plowing the field. All of these industries have been disrupted. So I don't think there's any particular industry that is not disrupted. Even lawyers are being disrupted by AI like Watson, which is able to churn out contracts at a far quicker pace and more accurate than lawyers themselves. Accountants these days, and no disrespect to accountants, are no longer in requirement by businesses because we have all the software that can do everything up to a balance sheet, and accountants have now become investment advisors.
And in your opinion, positive disruption or negative disruption? Because with technology comes a loss of jobs to an extent.
Well, no, you know, we focus on the fact that disruption can cause loss of jobs, right? But I like to think of it that the disruption is actually positive. Human nature and human evolution has always been reliant on disruption. And as disruption has come about, we've become more resilient and we've become more innovative. So if we think about at the onset of the early 19th century, when we had the steam engine that came about or the car that came about, and people said this car is going to disrupt the horses. Everyone had horses and cars. But if you think about the evolution of that, when the car came along, the complaint was that the horse drivers would lose their riders would lose their job, the carriageman would lose his job, the blacksmith would lose his job. But the evolution of that was that the blacksmith became the mechanic that needed to look after the car, and the horse rider became the driver and the chauffeur in the car, and the stable hand became the person that was providing the fuel to the car at the service station. Human nature has been that we've always evolved, and so disruption will create more ways in which we would become more evolved and technological. So, for instance, someone would say, the robot is going to put me out of the job. But the robot in the factory needs someone to train it to do the work it is put out there to do. You need a mechanic to look after the robot. You need someone that will be the technical advisor that will be looking at the technical aspect of that robot. Even if you're talking about drones, you need a drone mechanic that will be able to fix the drone. You need drone pilots. So all of these things are innovations that will create an evolution in the way we are doing our work. Ultimately, I believe that we will have more time to spend at home.
Fantastic answer. I absolutely share your sentiments. Human evolution has pushed us in a direction where we require these disruptions in order to become more successful and better at what we do. We're almost at the end of the show, but I must ask before we round up. We spoke about startups from an investor perspective and an investee perspective. Currently, is there any platform where an investor and investee can meet?
That, I think, is a fantastic, not question, but it's an idea that you have put out. How can we create this platform where investors and investees can meet?
Tinder for business.
And I say that because there are platforms that exist. These are across both South Africa and across the globe. But we're talking in the context of the Durban community. And perhaps that's an area that we need to work on. How do we create that platform where we can get the investor and the investee to meet? And I think that let's take that conversation and see how, if there is someone that has the technical expertise to create this platform, to partner with us and see how we can launch this platform.
Okay, Ibrahim, I just want to maybe conclude on two kind of stories. One is, I always look at the Somali community around us, and especially in Johannesburg, in that Mayfair area, and I see how they have assisted and helped each another, whereby they've asked their brethren from Somalia to come across. They've provided the funding to get them started, and slowly but surely they've created massive businesses. They've created even their own masjids have been opened. They've created their own schools, and it's all around us, but we're not part of it. But I admire what they've done for each another, and it all boils down to the fact that there's an element of trust. You bring people across, you fund them, and you grow people, and by growing them, you're growing yourself as well. And they've created these communities. I mean, if you go into that Albert Park area, etc., as well here, which many of us don't go to because sometimes we feel it's too dangerous to go there. You see what's happening out there. There's communities being created. There's foreigners that's coming in. They're assisting each another and they're growing each another. So that's a good example of where you help somebody and you help yourself and you grow. I don't know if you agree with me, but they've certainly, these communities have come up around us.
I totally agree with you, Anwar. But there's a second element besides trust that has led to this success, and that is discipline. And that discipline has come from the fact that when a Somali arrives in Durban, I give you this example because I've had the discussion with the Somali community in Durban. When he arrives in Durban and he wants to go and start up a business, he goes to a central committee, almost like a Amir, and says, I want to start up this business. They would tell him which business to start up. They would tell him where to go to start up that business. So they would tell him, you go and stand at this street corner and you will sell belts, for instance, and just giving an example.
Right.
And they would tell him where to get the belts from, and the belts are supplied to him. He can't turn around and say, no, I don't want to sell belts, I want to sell shoelaces. Okay. And that's the discipline that has been created. Now, if we want to have that kind of success, we also need to have that kind of discipline, where if we say that, as a community, we want to put our money into funding this particular impactful startup, then we must have the discipline to say that that money is, number one, it's going to be at risk because there's no guarantee that the business will be success, and we must be able to accept it that, we might lose our money. The secondly is that business owner that has been started up has to have the discipline to say that I have to be diligent in making certain that the business is successful, and my first priority is to make sure that my shareholders are happy and not my motor car dealer where I go and buy my Ferrari from.
Okay.
So these are the kind of disciplines also that we need to inculcate that brings about the success. And I'll give you a second example of discipline that I've seen, and that is particularly within the Turkish community that has come to South Africa.
Yes.
And the amount of discipline that they have. They actually, to use the terminology, they've been deployed into different positions, and they accept that deployment and they work diligently into those positions, and growth makes certain that they success within that. And these are the kind of things that we need to start looking at and say these are examples for us to use as advice to our growth as well. And how do we see ourselves, as Imran points out, how do we see ourselves at 5 years from now?
Fantastic. I mean, one of the first things I was taught when I went to university is the higher the risk, the higher the return. So one has to take an element of risk, and if the risk is higher, then perhaps the return is going to be higher. So to answer part of that question. Secondly, Imran and I were approached, and one of the reasons we're having these programs earlier this week by a family that came to see us and said, we have this plan, a startup. We want to start a chicken feedlot. We've got a customer base, etc. Now, again, it's something that's there. There's somebody that's got a brilliant plan. They've got a customer base, and they need the funding. And it got us thinking about startups, and so I'm saying there are people up there, different levels, but if we can create this forum where we can put investor and investee together, I think it will be absolutely brilliant. And perhaps the Minara Chamber of Commerce is the forum that we need to use to do this.
Most definitely.
Ibrahim, we thank you for your time. Always a pleasure speaking to you. And I think we've learned a hell of a lot tonight. And let's not let it lie here. Let's take this forward, and let's try to do something in terms of the startups, and perhaps we'll be chatting in 3 to 5 years' time and saying, oh, wow, what have we created here? And I'm sure we would create something fantastic. So with that, I thank you for your time, and we're sure to speak to you again sometime in the near future.
Anwar, always a pleasure chatting to you, and shukran for having me with you this evening, and shukran, Imran. It's the first time we are chatting together.
I look forward to many discussions in the future. Definitely very insightful. Ameen.
With that, I think we've overrun our time a little bit. Abdul on the technical side. Thank you, Abdul, for being with us tonight. And with that, we need to say wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.